I'm most struck by the statement, soon machines will be able to outperform people in every way except creativity and critical thinking.
Mm,
I've been
yeah.
watching some videos about Elon Musk talking about AI this week, so it kind of rung true to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's kind of hard to believe when you've got, AI trying to, finish your sentence when you're doing emails or chats and things, and you're like, no, you just want to reject everything that they offer. But yeah, no, it's really fascinating to think about. Well, have you been looking into it all in terms of the concept of singularity and that sort of thing as well, or?
Yes, yeah. So the whole idea that we currently are uh, participating in the experiment
Mm-hmm.
in the form of surveillance capitalism.
Yeah. And all of that. Yep. Well, and there's actually, I guess, there's a TEDx speaker that's going around basically striking the fear of God into parents and saying, like, keep your kids away from technology. All technology is evil. To me, that just seems like the wrong answer. It's like, instead we should be empowered and guiding,
Mm-hmm.
technology. And
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
exactly.
yeah. So anyway, so that kind of guides us a little bit.
I just want to share some cool news. This week, I'm actually writing an article on blockchain and human coordination. So a good chunk of that is going to be around how blockchain can actually assimilate for climate change and how people can come together, not just through different regions and areas, but through different nations and actually plan accordingly.
Cool.
Oh, that's awesome, Frank. By the way, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Frank. I'm an undergraduate developer from Champaign-Urbana. I'm currently studying down here, getting a degree in economics, and most of my focus though is on computer science. So I've been down the blockchain rabbit hole since about 2014, after the birth of Ethereum. I started researching ERC20 tokens, kind of went through that craze of just new currencies popping out of existence between 2015 and 2016.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually found my way to Greg's talk on one of the Ethereum Foundation's videos, his introducing Roland talk. And since then, I've been a diehard advocate for our chain and Casper as a community.
Cool.
Awesome. Wow, great to make your acquaintance.
Yeah, cool. Very cool.
So I would love to hear more about what you have to say about, specifically, I mean, about a lot of things, but specifically how we coordinate.
Yeah, so it's difficult as of now to actually have some sort of mechanism to actually determine how much pollution is being emitted into the air, because the way that it's actually tracked is it's very statistical, but at times it's not very relevant.
A mechanism of coordinating on how pollution is put in the air.
Yeah, exactly. So as of now, the only mechanism we really have is measuring atmospheric pressures and actually finding out what the level of carbon emissions are in the air. And from what I've studied, what I've researched, if we actually had some sort of carbon tax, there is potential for blockchain to be used to actually measure carbon outputs between each car and actually levy an incentive structure to push humans to coordinate in the right direction. And again, this is always very theoretical since we're in such an early stage of development, but I think it's just a fun idea to kind of toggle with and think through.
Would it just apply to cars or other types of pollution potentially?
As of now, it would just be cars. So it would be taking the motor industry and pretty much re-examining it and placing new mechanisms there.
Mm-hmm.
However, it could be applied to even something as large as like nuclear energy spots where we have these giant nuclear reactors and we really don't know where the toxic waste is going at all the time.
You know, I was reading an article about nuclear energy, and that there's newer, kind of more modern technology that actually allows them to burn up even the waste that's been created in the past. And it's just it works differently. And so it can burn what otherwise would have been toxic. I thought that was kind of interesting. Don't know if it's actually being, used anywhere, but
Oh,
the concept is there.
interesting. Yeah, I've never heard of that.
Yeah.
But there is a kind of seems to be a growing community within the global warming spectrum that is kind of looking to nuclear as a potential solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's part of why, though, because it wouldn't create the same level of toxins, and could be safer in that respect. Um, Hopefully they don't continue to build them near fault lines and the ocean and places that have created other types of problems, right?
Yeah, like there's just potential for more intelligent use of it. I think Bill Gates, I think, is pretty focused on that, as I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
He seems to kind of have less faith than Elon in the idea of solar, wind plus storage. Elon made a bold statement that I saw in a YouTube video this week. I don't know if I have his numbers right, but he seemed to suggest that to power all of the United States with solar plus storage would require 100 square miles of solar panels and 1 square mile of batteries, which seems incredibly low to me, but I haven't had time to kind of dig into those numbers. But have you heard anything about that kind of a projection?
No, I haven't. But I guess part of what bothers me a little bit about that is just that we actually have the technology we've had since the 70s to build homes differently so that they can basically be off grid, even if they were in urban environments where they could have sort of airflow, utilizing sun, solar, how energy is used within the house, all of those things, so that they could really use minimal amounts of energy. And clearly we've become electrified to the point with, computers and everything else in the home, and using Alexa or Google or whoever, turn on lights, etc. But so there's other needs for electrical than just heating a home, or heating water and things like that have always been the main drags on power in a house, right? But we have, we're so much in the mindset of sort of making money off of energy and making, money in these corporate manners that we don't build for any sort of self-sufficiency. And that's just frustrating to see that go on for the last 50 years, right?
Yeah. You make a lot of sense because it's not exciting. We have to, it's kind of boring, to do those things. It's not like building new nuclear power plants. It's like, we have to fix the things that we already have, and that's boring. Yes, we have to somehow make that catchy and exciting.
Well, I mean, seriously, that is where like regulations, where literally they could just be designing places to be more efficient, and instead they're going with sort of cheap construction and inefficient architecture, that it doesn't have to be that way, and it really hasn't needed to be that way for like a long time. I grew up near Davis, where there were whole developments they were building to be off grid, and my mom would always take us on house tours and stuff. And so we would go on these house tours where like basically every house in a development was completely off grid. I mean, for all I know, they're no longer off grid the way that things have gone, but but it's just kind of crazy though to think that
Yeah.
we just keep working towards these profits and corporate profit, instead of kind of what could actually be more functional and better for the environment and better for people.
Yeah. And that raises a great question. And that's one that I struggled with a lot, was if people are even given the opportunity to switch over to, say, solar,
Mm-hmm.
would they still switch over, or would they just keep with the norm and just be hooked up to the grid normally?
I think it's about ease, how easy you make it, for anybody. I mean, even with blockchain, user interface and how easy you make it for people to understand the concept of it is where you get people to make the switch, right? And, with going from something versus something you don't know, it's like, is it easier for you? What is that transaction hurdle, right? I mean, in terms of the just making the switch. And if you make it simple for people and then they can save money and everything else, then why wouldn't they? But if it's hard to do, hard to figure it out, that sort of thing, then
Yeah,
people.
so it's removing the friction.
Mhm.
And I think what Daryl said really resonated with me on how the efforts that Elon is putting forward with Solar City, with Tesla, with the power walls. I think that might be the realm where it makes it so much easier just to switch over, that people finally act on it.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
if your roof has all the solar built in, literally, with the tiles, although they're having challenges with that. But if your house was just purchased that way, the same way if it was more efficient when you purchased it,
Mm.
you wouldn't try to make it less efficient. You would choose a more efficient house.
Yeah, I think ease and cost is another major one.
Mm-hmm.
Over the last few weeks, we've been kind of talking about how there already is kind of a major shift in some of the biggest financial corporations towards decarbonization technologies, which is encouraging, because nothing's going to really change until it's actually cheaper, and it's happening. Like, I think that you could make the argument that right now buying a Chevy Bolt is possibly the cheapest car you could buy when you factor in the entire life cycle of the car as the price of the car. And most people don't think of it that way, but within the next 2 years, I predict electric cars will literally be cheaper than even ticket price than ICE cars. And I think that's when you're going to really see the shift happen.
Yeah, it's funny. I have a Chevy Bolt.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
Awesome. Do you like it? I've been thinking about getting one.
I love it because not only is it something I feel good about using, but it's actually has a lot of power, has a lot of space in the car, a lot of even trunk space. Like it's functional, as well as I know that we use it primarily. I rarely ever get gas. We do have an alternative car that does use gas, but we rarely drive it and rarely buy gas. And so,
That's amazing.
yeah, so you just have to make an effort to actually wash the car because you're never near any of those places where you clean it.
Huh. That's an interesting thing. Yeah, like Like there should be like Tesla power stations that have car washes.
Something like that, yeah.
So yeah, it seems to me like the main people that have range anxiety regarding electric vehicles are non-electric car owners. Do
Yeah.
you ever get range anxiety?
No, I mean, we just, I live in LA, so, you're in the car a fair amount. And, we don't even have one of the more, what do you call it, the fast chargers. So, I mean, we don't need it, so we didn't make that change. But trying to think if I ever have range anxiety, literally. I mean, we just, like, my sister lives in Northern California. We don't take it to drive up there because we wouldn't have a place to plug into up there. So the infrastructure isn't necessarily around to support that, driving everywhere. Whereas for Teslas, they made a point of creating that infrastructure along major highways. So you can stop off at a Starbucks and charge, the car for half an hour kind of thing. Um, so infrastructure still needs to be addressed. But other than that, no, I mean, that's why we use the car all the time, because we can use it for days and not have to charge it if we wanted to.
Right, right.
But,
can you guys hear me now or no?
hey, Nora.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hi. Okay, I had to call in on my phone in a different way than I usually use my phone, so sorry about that. This is a fantastic conversation. I'm really hoping that we're recording this. Okay, good. That's awesome. Did you guys get a chance to talk about your project, Jan? Your Prototopian Lab Tech Creative Lab project, which I think is so amazing.
We did not talk about it.
Okay, well, I would love to chat about that. And then I also have a news story I wanted to bring up, which I thought would be really interesting. So everybody, Jan runs Prototopian Tech, and there was something in her on the website about this that I thought was so compatible with our chain and the things that we talk about here. It says here, Prototopian Tech provides creative labs and visualization and creative problem solving to develop the ingenuity needed for understanding and applying emerging technologies to solve global and local problems and the stories we want to write in our future. I thought that was such a poignant and inspiring sentence there. So I would just love to hear more about what you guys are up to and what your goals are. And I just want to congratulate you on doing this.
Cool. Thanks. So I can certainly kind of give you a little overview of it. Jill Kerrigan and I are the co-founders, and we met through blockchain. And she had the initial idea that in order to bring blockchain to the masses, that the creatives needed to understand what blockchain was and that sort of thing, so it could be represented. And it sort of expanded from there for a couple of different reasons. One is it's really hard to represent what is essentially sort of like a database, if you think about it, on, say, in stories or and what the impact would be, and how it really changes the way that organizationally we're structured and interact with each other, and fundamentally how it changes, just by nature of data changing, how the relationship between business and consumers or business and business changes, right? So one is that's hard to illustrate. But the other is we're on the cusp of so much change. Even in the next 5 years, the amount of change that we'll be seeing with the emerging technologies, the way that really they're converging, it's dramatic. And I think people will see things like when we get 5G and AR is in all of our apps, and you'll expect augmented reality to be in an app, or you'll feel like it's broken, probably somewhere in like the 3 to 5 year time range, right? Where eventually when you have this augmented reality, in all of the technology you're using, that sort of thing, you're going to feel like phone is in your way, and you'll want to use things like Google Glasses and things like that so that you can, interact with technology in the ways that you're expecting to. That probably getting more to that by 10 years time, right? So and that's just in ways that people, I think consumers, will start to see a difference. But the way that AI and machine learning have already impacted our technology and everything we're doing, the way that blockchain will be enabling IoT, and that will change, how we're driving our cars, how even already food being delivered, or other items being delivered, and how those things are going to be changing, drones and just all of these different sort of technologies that are going to be working together and exponentially changing our culture and our experience. If you think about when we changed over from 3G to 4G, all of a sudden we have social media, not just everyone staring at their phones when they're walking around, or GPS being incorporated into apps and things. But then you also have where, people are expecting that if they have a bad experience at a restaurant, they want to post that on social media, they want to be compensated for that. So you see the relationships between consumers and all of this changing, right? But then you also see a greater digital divide and more fear about technology, less understanding about technology. And so there being these extremes in both the exponential change and I think the fear around technology, we wanted to address that gap and also empower people to become part of the technology and part of the change, and to guide that change. And also by expanding the number of people who understand this technology, expanding the number of entrepreneurs, so that we have more people utilizing and thinking about these emerging technologies as how they might solve problems in their own communities. And that's where we're thinking about local and global problems being addressed through these emerging technologies, because then you have more than just the Silicon Valley guys looking at how to create a smarter app that will help other technologists do their jobs, and getting more insular and all looking at their belly buttons, but instead thinking about how we can address, climate change and other, things in our daily lives, and in our communities, how we can address these problems. From problems you get products, and having then more diverse products that are created using these emerging technologies. So that's kind of the genesis, the impulse. And I can talk about kind of which target groups we have. And basically these are like creative labs and workshops. And also then we'll be doing online curriculum and creating sort of an education platform to sort of engage people in it and help them understand it, look behind the curtain, under the hood, demystify it, so that they can really engage.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I think a lot of people are going to need, because everybody's building all these blockchain apps and different types of apps, and there is definitely sometimes a little bit of friction for people who don't really know much about it. And I love that you call yourself a blockchain education entrepreneur. I think, is that what you said?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's such a cool title, because we're going to need people to help society move into this direction, because there's no stopping any of it. We can possibly try to control certain things, but technology is definitely coming for us. And speaking of change, there was one article that I thought was really fascinating. It's from February 2nd and 3rd. I'm going to paste it. Oh, I can't paste it in the chat because I'm on a phone call. Okay, Plan B. It's okay. I'll just tell you about it. So you can look this up. It's from CNBC, and the headline is Goldman downgrades Exxon to sell, says there's, quote, no compelling case, end quote, to own the stock. So I thought that was a really interesting thing. We always talk on this call about how things are changing. And this is a really fascinating piece about how Exxon's earnings are just going down and down. And basically people who have money, their managers are asking them to move it, to not have stock or to invest in this company because it's just headed into a bad place, and I think that's a really good sign. And every day I see more articles about this kind of stuff happening, and I get really inspired that possibly we can prosper and save the planet.
Hmm. Yeah,
So,
well, and I think that,
an interesting thing.
yeah, certainly people who are working in oil and gas know that their days are numbered and they're trying to milk it for as much as they can while they can. But, you know, that's why they've even been exploring alternative energy, you know, because they know that this is going away. They're cash cow, basically.
Right. Well, that's the great question, right? Is do you just stay in a thing that you know is ultimately really bad for the planet and for you and your kids, or do you pivot, find a new job, or the company, do they learn to create green energy and actually become part of the solution? But there's a big, schism there between the easy route and the right route, which is ultimately the easiest one, meaning, it's going to be expensive to buy another planet. That would be hard to do. So I just find it very interesting that this is becoming a very mainstream thing. We used to talk about it a few years ago, but now it's becoming so widely known that this schism is really kind of breaking open, and it just makes me feel like change is coming,
Yeah, and I love, Jan, how you actually talked about the convergence of these technologies, where it's not just blockchain anymore. It's also incorporating augmented reality and bringing in machine learning. And I've noticed a lot of cool projects that actually co-align with that. One of them that I wanted to bring up was actually a startup built by Fred Ursum called Open Mind. And it's all about bringing machine learning into the blockchain realm and using incentive structures like proof of work and manipulating them to actually run machine learning problems. Now, how well it coordinates with climate change, probably not that much, but an interesting project nonetheless.
Yeah.
Well, machine learning could be very integrated with saving the planet, definitely. I mean, if you talk about planting trees with drones, I mean, there's all sorts of doing climate data science, alert systems to let people know when natural disasters are coming. If we start putting out fires with, different methods other than firefighters, because obviously there aren't enough of them and it's becoming deadly for them. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff that machine learning can help with the climate, potentially.
Yeah, even on the technical side, I think they could do a lot of work with running algorithms to define a given set for semiconductors, and then using that in solar technology and actually advancing solar at the rate of, say, a tech company.
Mm-hmm.
I think that one area to consider when thinking about the idea of using our combined data resources to come up with solutions is that there are the biggest companies in the world right now, the companies that have surpassed the oil companies. The next energy source for America is our data. There's this guy I've talked about before, this guy named Johan Galtung. He's like a peace negotiator. And he wrote a book called, I probably don't have the title quite right, but it's The Decline of the American Empire and Then What? And he talks about how empires rise and fall. And they always rise and fall around an energy source. So the Romans and the Egyptians, they rose and fell with their energy source being humans.
Sure.
The Dutch was wind. The England with the Industrial Revolution was coal, and the United States was oil. And this article that Nora pointed out this week points to the decline of the American energy source. And so what is happening is America has made, since around 2000, so it's been like 20 years, they have already made the shift towards the next energy source. And the companies that have surpassed the oil companies are using our data as their energy source. They're no longer mining and pumping oil from the ground, they're mining and pumping data from our mines. And we're willingly giving it to them. And the business model is built around selling it back to us. That, to me, is probably the most fundamental problem. And when you combine that with the potential warnings that Elon Musk and others say about what AI could do to us if we don't participate together as a species in order to govern the way AI unfolds, we're in big trouble. So to me, it's directly connected. What you're talking about is directly connected to global warming. In fact, if we're going to solve the global warming crisis, we have to solve that. We have to figure out how we can work together and make sure that the data that we're feeding isn't feeding these giant mega server farms that are creating this machine learning algorithm to try to figure out how to employ engineered behavior modification, as Shoshana Zuboff calls it. This is vital. I think it's urgent, actually. We have to solve this before these other things that you guys are talking about come into play, because all these other things are going to be governed by what we do with the data.
That's interesting that you talk about data as an energy source. I mean, obviously it contributes to our economy the way our business models are set up now, but I hadn't thought of it as an energy source per se, right? Because it takes so much energy to store this data and to manipulate the data and work with the data, right? So that's an interesting way to think about it.
Well, yeah, when you look at the first examples that Johan brings up, which is the Romans and the Egyptians and the Mayans, they used people, right, as their energy source. We've now come full circle. We're now using people again as our energy source, but this time it's our data. And the thing that I find so fascinating is that as the American empire dies, and I do believe it is dying right now, and I don't think that's necessarily a tragic thing, but as we're witnessing its demise, we're witnessing a takeover from the outside, and we're witnessing it through the manipulation of the data machine that generates so much money for the biggest companies in America. It's being literally hacked into to such a degree where it's eroding the culture of America. America has been bombed. It's a cultural bomb, and it's happened very rapidly. It's been bombed by the Russians, and most Americans look at it right in the face and deny it, which is really freaky to me to witness.
Yeah.
But it's happening from the outside in. The decay is happening from the outside in. It's like the Trojan horse on steroids, and America's completely oblivious to it, pretty much.
Well, I think that's why decentralized identity is so important, and how it can potentially turn all of this on its head, right? Where then instead people can own their data, and it takes companies like Facebook, to sort of not necessarily out of the picture. I'm sure they'll find a way to stay in the picture, but where they will have to, and not just Facebook. I mean, there are so many third parties that have our data that we don't even realize, where our data gets sold and sold and sold and used in all these different ways that, for all of these business models and much of our economy has already switched over to that type of data economy.
Yep.
I think that what we need to do is help people in an, well, this gets back to what we were talking about earlier, is sort of having sort of less friction so that people can understand this and then also be empowered by it and have a frictionless way to own their data and to be compensated for their data, or to say, no, I'm not giving up my data. And and companies then having to find other ways to monetize instead of monetizing off of us.
Yep,
Yeah, I
you
think this is going to be the
nailed it.
next big wave, is when users actually start having the ability to sell their data personally, instead of just letting big tech companies harvest their data and then sell it without consent.
Mm-hmm.
So once
Yes.
there's actually a mechanism as to, okay, I can put my data on a data marketplace and people can purchase what exactly they want. Until then, I think we're kind of be in this like stagnation phase between actually having prosperity and being in a dystopian 1984 kind of surveillance state.
I agree totally with that. I would just like to add that we have to be sure about what we're selling our data for.
Mm-hmm.
That is the key. So yes, we have to be in control of our data, and this is really why I joined RChain. I believe in the our concept of RChain. It's our chain, and we're building it differently. So the idea of what we do with our data is what is fundamentally important here. And I share Elon's sense of urgency. He kind of explains it like how we can't wait for governments, we can't wait for regulators. Usually with burgeoning technologies, the technologies blast through and do things, and then the regulators have to catch up because maybe some damage has been done or somebody's been harmed. So then the regulators kind of go, whoa, okay, wait a minute, we have to kind of change this, we have to kind of change that. We don't have that luxury with AI. We have to solve it ourselves, and we have to, before this technology starts to get employed, we have to figure out what we're doing with it as a species, collectively.
And so that's part of why then with Prototopian Tech, one of the groups that we're targeting to help understand emerging technologies is creatives. Because so creatives today usually will learn about a type of emerging technology for whatever project they're working on, and they don't learn about it comprehensively, right, in terms of kind of where we're looking ahead. And so you see things like the movie Ad Astra that had Brad Pitt in it, that came out this past fall, where they represent ownership in space, because everyone knows about Elon Musk, but it didn't include anything about non-ownership in space, right? Like in terms of what blockchain and cooperatives and other things that might exist in the future, right? And so then also, if all you have is fear of technology, then that's all you represent is a dystopian future. Whereas instead, if you understand how things might be guided and you can think more creatively and imaginatively about how these emerging technologies might be employed, then you have like Star Trek in the past, when they were imagining new things, and talking about more of a utopian future, right? And you have flip phones, beam me up, Scotty, and sliding doors that didn't exist before. You have, Stargate in 1993 showing literally the first concept of an iPad, right? You have where you can have more imaginative ideas about what the future is and how we might solve our problems when there's more of an understanding around the technologies. Whereas if all you have is fear of the technology, and you can only imagine that we're doomed and that it's going to overtake us. So I think that there's even actually a new what is the one with Will Robinson? The Danger Will Robinson, the series that was also from back then.
Oh, Lost in Space?
Lost in Space. There's even a new version of Lost in Space. What's so interesting is the way that the kid, Will Robinson, he has this sort of pure heart that is like speaking to these robots and transforming their fear of us, and instead working with us and to help protect us when they have access to greater technologies than we can understand, and things like that, right? And so I think in part we have to overcome our fear and
Yes.
empower ourselves to do something about this, so that in the same way with climate change, people give up.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I can't save the planet on my own, so I'm not going to bother recycling, I'm not going to bother doing these constructive things, when in fact, if we each did things were more constructive, it has an impact. And if we're educated about it and we demand that of the people that we're electing, and we elect people who aren't scared of it but actually believe we can do something about it, then we get better laws and better changes. And it's the same thing, requiring that authenticity and those changes of our corporations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to take a stance against Daryl here and say,
Yeah.
I personally think that artificial intelligence is being overhyped.
Okay.
In regards to how it's being built today.
Yeah.
Most of it, while I know most of it is mostly software based, and that it's like convolutional neural networks and these machine learning algorithms, I think the robotics aspect of it is very much something that's going to bring a lot of prosperity to Earth, not just to Earth, to the like far reaches of the world that needs it right now, like Venezuela and Zimbabwe.
Oh yeah, please don't get me wrong. I'm super thrilled about the technology, and Jen, what you had just said was like, I was loving it so much. I was super inspired by it. It kind of reminds me of so I'm a music producer by trade. Like that's what I've been doing for the last like 35 years of my life, and I've worked with some artists that have become like some of the biggest artists in the world. And what I can observe about the particular characteristics of some of these successful people, not always, but there's a particular characteristic that I've been able to kind of like observe. I've been fortunate enough to, and that is that it's exactly the same as when I look at my cat. When I observe my cat has zero doubt that my cat is a cat. She completely is 100% a cat with full confidence. And when I witness these creative musicians that I've been fortunate enough to work with, they are the same. They don't doubt for a second that they're creative. They don't even think about that. They're just doing it, and they're making it, and they're forging ahead with their art and creativity. And they wouldn't even contemplate anything otherwise. And to me, that is the key to solving this. We have to believe in this. We have no choice. And we have to use the AI technology for the greater good of ourselves. That's the thing that Elon kind of warns us about, is that currently it isn't being used that way. By at least the biggest companies in the world. So
sure. They're mining our data and applying AI and machine learning to it, and yeah, they're using it for their own benefit and profit, and not necessarily for good.
Yes, and what Shoshana has pointed out is that the model has been since the beginning of Google, one based around advertising. And it's interesting because she points out the moment when Google started doing that. And it's a really interesting period in our history around the turn of the millennium when that first happened. So the model is now shifting from selling the data back to ourselves in a manipulated way to using that data to manipulate us for other means. So it's it's starting to kind of move to that next level and stage of manipulation that I think we have to be very, very concerned about.
Yeah, at a certain point, it definitely gets invasive when you start getting products that you haven't even typed in and that you've only thought about in your head. And the next thing you know, you're seeing an advertisement.
So what you need to know is that they know way more than that. So in fact, so much of what they do is about making sure that you don't know how much they know. They don't want to be creepy. And there's tons of money being poured into these companies to make sure that they don't come across revealing how much they actually do know about you. And so that's why it's taken this other turn now within the last few years. I highly recommend her book, Surveillance Capitalism, because she gets quite detailed into where they've come from the advertising model and where they're going with it.
And what year is that from, if you don't mind me asking?
I think it came out in 2018.
All right, I'll look into it.
Yeah.
So I'm late to the conversation. I've been listening in for a while, but who are our guests today?
Hi, I'm Frank. I guess I'm a guest. This might be like my 10th time coming on to the talks.
Oh yeah, I recognize you, Frank. But there's another person here.
My name's Jan Young, and I'm a co-founder of Prototopian Tech. And Nora invited me to join in today.
Awesome, that's really great. Well, it's great to hear your perspectives. Jan, I was particularly struck by your comments about not giving up. And one of the ways that I think about it is it's kind of it's funny. You could think of worlds not as planets out in space, but as the sum total of the impressions that you let into your awareness. So and we kind of have this language anyway. There's like your work world, and your music world, and your hobby world. So these worlds are really sort of coherent collections of impressions. And one of the things that you can think about is about world travel in this way, where you begin to admit new and different impressions into your world. And once you have this idea, that the smallest little observation or impression can really have giant ripple effects over your whole attention. I think we've all had this experience walking down this street and you notice a particular tree, and it's like, how did I miss that? How was that not present to me? And this has to do with a shift in the quality of our attention, and this is directly related to the kinds of efforts that we make. So as we make certain kinds of efforts, those efforts change the impressions that make up worlds that we're traveling in. And a really, really tiny change can result in a fairly big shift in the world that we're inhabiting and the world that we're experiencing. And I fundamentally, this is directly related to what Daryl is saying, but it's also related to the discussion of AI. So the ability to travel worlds in this way is directly related to our faith, what we believe in, because that has to do with which impressions we admit into our experience and those impressions that we simply we can't see. And that's one of the most direct and specific ways that belief and faith have an impact on our experience. Now, with respect to AI, I think it's absolutely true that what is called AI today is it's rather sad to me that's called AI. AI used to be a much larger field than it is currently, and that's because the convolutional neural networks have had what's perceived as success. But there are two major problems with those approaches, those techniques. One is that they're not compositional. You can't take a neural network that's good at recognizing, let's say, the age of a face with one that is good at characterizing the expression on the face, and whack them together to get a neural network, single neural network that recognizes both the age and the expression. So that's a serious problem because it means that if you want to start combining characteristics, you have to begin again from scratch, from something up from scratch, and that's just not how nature scales. It's not how you scale systems. But the other thing that is challenging about neural networks is they can't tell you why. Like one of the things that we expect of our wise and experienced characters in our lives is this ability to say why a course of action results in a particular consequence that maybe some desired outcome. And that's not something that is available from neural networks. I know a lot of people are working on it, but so far neural networks are black boxes. There are other techniques that do yield, that are compositional and do yield explanations. They don't work on the numeric data in quite the same way. So there's hope that one might be able to combine the two and start to get something that's a little bit more interesting as a device. But the important thing I think is, with respect to what Daryl is saying, is just that the extent to which we allow these programs to manipulate the impressions starts to our awareness, and we do so without intent and without an understanding of the consequences. Is the extent to which we can find ourselves in free fall in terms of this world traveling that I was talking about. All right. Well, I've said a whole bunch of stuff, so I'll shut up and see if there's any response.
Yeah, and Greg, do you see these new technologies, like you said, convolutional neural networks, and this whole area of machine learning? Do you see this converging with our chain and with the blockchain platform?
Well, I know that lots of people want to do so. So, for example, one of our partners, Arterian, wants to use blockchain-based support for the payments to rights holders of impressions of fine art. And one of the things that they will be concerned about is, when there are misuses. So they would like to be able to recognize a particular digital impression of some piece of fine art. Van Gogh's Starry Night. And so they're looking to use convolutional neural networks to build sort of the Shazam of fine art. Shazam, that service. You can hold your phone up to the air to listen to a particular song, and it identifies the song. Right? So that's clearly using neural networks. And something similar. They want to do something similar, and then add that as a part of what's going on with our chain. And so we certainly can't. We have no say in that, right? Our chain is open source technology, and if people want to combine those technologies in that way, it's not a bad use case. I can grok it. I think many people can grok it. But as I said, I believe, and I've talked about this on the RCast several times, that there are better techniques to add. And in particular, I'm interested in techniques that are compositional and have explanatory power. So otherwise, you're not really doing science.
And so do you see this impacting the music industry as well?
I mean, it already has, right? I mean, in general, there's this whole issue of, fair compensation for intellectual property, right? And that's a long and deep conversation. I don't even know how to approach. Yeah, I mean, I've been, as someone.
Greg, I think we lost you there.
Or who did we lose? Somebody getting into a car.
Oh, it was getting so good too.
Yeah. Well, I guess, and I don't know if.
Sorry, guys, my my puppy jumped on me and knocked my headphones out of my phone.
Awesome.
And in the process, I think she destroyed the headphones. But anyway, there was a question. I can't remember the question now. What was the question?
Just how you think machine learning, if it is applied to the blockchain, how artists and musicians might use it.
Well, yeah, I mean, so there's this group, Big Chain DB, that was very concerned about misuse of rights. They wanted to do blockchain based work on payments and digital rights. Basically provenance. They were going after provenance, and their CEO was really big on the use of AI. Had done a lot of work with application of AI to the synthesis of chips and stuff. So he repurposed some of the work that he did and other work to help track, help track provenance for things. So provenance is certainly a place, but I honestly, I would really hope that we get to a completely different, a different conception of what copyright and intellectual property, how we do compensation for that. I think we're still in this weird world where most of the cost of things digital are hidden to people. People don't understand the thermodynamic consequences of storing, millions and millions of photos up in the cloud, and the fact that those data centers are just spewing heat, on to keep all those cat memes circulating around the internet. And likewise, people don't understand the cost, the labor involved in the creation of certain kinds of digital artifacts. So, I can say as a musician, it's taken me decades to acquire a certain level of skill, and then, for a 4 to 5 minute sonic experience, that may take me 100 hours, and may take an ensemble, collectively each, an additional 40 hours each. So, that's that's quite a bit of work, and yet most people are expecting to be able to get, a digital artifact like that for next to nothing. And so that becomes insupportable, right? That means that you couldn't have creative classes that are creating those kinds of artifacts. But the mechanisms that we've got for helping people be supported in their craft, they don't fit. They don't fit the need. And so maybe there's a way that AI can be applied to help with that. But I think before that happens, we have to have some kind of reconceptualization of what it means to support communities that create these artifacts that we love. As I think, I'm just speaking honestly now. I think that's what's really has to happen.
I think that you just nailed it when you said the word communities. I think part of the problem with intellectual property is the second word, property. Thinking about music as property is actually kind of absurd.
Yes, exactly.
Music does not occupy the physical three-dimensional space in the same way property does. And to me, music is about the community. So how we attribute value to the music has to include the community.
Well, it's how business models have been imposed in the past, right? And there's sort of a history of, from when pianos, were the main form of entertainment, and there was licensing, for sheet music and things like that, right? In terms of how it sort of evolved, for better or for worse. I guess I'm not really clear about the relationship between those business models of compensation so that people make a living at doing this, versus how AI or machine learning would be connected to it, though. I mean, how would something with an algorithm impact that, whether, business model?
Yeah, I mean, we know how it's done today, right? So on the one side, it's used for provenance, so detecting when someone is misusing an impression.
Okay.
So YouTube uses that all the time. It's not very effective, but it is used.
Okay.
I know some artists have sworn by it, in the sense that, so many people that have misused their work have been caught. And other artists are not particularly happy with it. So, you have to take it with a grain of salt. And then the other side is, of course, the sort of suggestions, right? So these algorithms are used watching people's behavior and making some suggestions about what they might like next.
Oh, okay.
Right, because we've moved, again, going back to world traveling, we've moved to a world where there is no Tower Records, at the center of the city. And so you don't have the happy accident of wandering into Tower Records and hearing something that you'd never heard before but really like, or seeing something in the bin next to the bin you're looking at that attracts your attention, or, bumping into someone who says, oh yeah, you've got to check this out, it's amazing. So those kinds of things don't happen. And currently, or at least not with the frequency that they used to happen. And so currently, the music, the people who are building businesses out of music use algorithms to substitute for those kinds of experiences.
Right. Well, like with the news feed, basically serving up more information or more extreme information from what you were reading before, as opposed to giving you different perspectives and different types of stories than what you've clicked on in the past, and then turning that news into these clickable events by, having salacious titles or leading titles or titles with numbers and all the other tricks they give you for, how to be clickable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
The impact of the algorithm.
Yeah, we're about 6-7 minutes over the hour. Normally, a bunch of us jump off for a staff meeting. I've got to jump off, but for those who are on and expecting there to be a staff meeting, because we're launching today, we're not going to hold the staff meeting, and I'll let the people in the staff meeting know that. But I've got to jump off. I really enjoyed hearing the conversation. As usual, it's very stimulating, thought-provoking, and I love the fact that the conversation is expanding to include more people.
Yay. Thanks so much, Jan and Frank.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it was great talking to you guys.
Yeah. Ciao, ciao.
Bye, everybody.
All right. Thank you.